Okay. So I'll just go down the line. That works. Thank you all so much for doing this for us. Really, we're so grateful. I,
I'm going to start right at 3:20 because I'm going to be that asshole. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Los Angeles, California. I am Demisty D. Bellinger, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. Here is a visual description of myself for those who may need it. I am a short, round, black woman with curly hair, twisted in two-strand twist, and I wear glasses. And I have on lipstick that's probably wearing off. We'll stop there. The Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty nonprofit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I am a member of AWP's Board of Directors, but first and foremost, I am a member of AWP. Membership with AWP provides me with writing resources year-round, but just as importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. My membership dues help writers find meaningful careers and publication opportunities and make services like the Writer-to-Writer Mentorship Program possible. If you are not already, I invite you to become a member today. We are delighted to bring you this event. I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and a literary partner hosting this event, the Natural Book Critics Circle, or NBCC. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please help join me in thanking to all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation. Yay. Before we start, I would like to do a little housekeeping, very brief. Please silence your cell phones. Like now, mute them. Don't be rude, don't be that person. It's always embarrassing. Remember, there is no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked as reserved for the attendees with accessibility needs. Don't question anyone if they do not look like they need accommodations. Just assume that they are doing the right thing. And please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table, which is a distance down the hall, before approaching them to have your book signed. Thank you all for being here. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Heather Scott Partington, who will introduce this fantastic event. Heather.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the entire AWP board and to our audience for coming out tonight. I apologize, I am losing my voice a little bit, so I'll try to speak as clearly as I can. We're delighted, the National Book Critics Circle is delighted to have this fabulous panel of fiction writers today. All three of these writers have been recognized as finalists or winners of the National Book Critics Circle Prize, and so it's truly our honor to have them with us. I'm Heather Scott Partington. I'm the president of the National Book Critics Circle. We had our awards last week in New York City, and you can watch the National Book Critics Circle recorded live stream. It's on our YouTube page if you're interested in learning a little bit more about us. At this time, I'd just like to introduce each of our panelists. I'll introduce them all to you, and then they are going to each read from their work. So to my left is Jonathan Lethem, the author of 13 novels, including The Fortress of Solitude and Girl in Landscape, as well as more recent bestsellers, The Feral Detective, The Arrest, and Brooklyn crime novel. His 1999 novel, Motherless Brooklyn, was filmed in 2019, and his shorter works can often be found in The New Yorker, Harper's Magazine, and many other venues. A MacArthur Genius Grant winner, Lethem is widely respected for his vivid literary style, sardonic humor, and deep understanding of American culture. His newest book is Cellophane Bricks from ZE Books. Please welcome Jonathan Lethem. To his left, our other Jonathan, we have a theme today, it's J names. Jonathan Escoffery is the author of If I Survive You, a National Book Award and Penn Gene Stein Book Award nominee, and a finalist for the Booker Prize, the Dublin Literary Award, the Penn Faulkner Award, and the John Leonard Prize. In 2023, Escoffery was named among the 36 forces shaping the cultural conversation by Harper's Bazaar. He is the recipient of a Stegner Fellowship, the Paris Review's Plimpton Prize for Fiction, an NEA Fellowship, and the ASME Award for Fiction. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Observer, American Short Fiction, and elsewhere. Please welcome Jonathan Escoffery. And on the end, we have Justin Torres. Justin Torres is the author of Blackouts, winner of the 2023 National Book Award for Fiction, and was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, a National Book Critics Circle Award, a Lambda Literary Award, and the Southern California Book Award. His debut novel, We the Animals, won the VCU Cabell First Novelist Award, was translated into 15 languages, and was adapted into a feature film. He teaches at the University of California, Los Angeles. Please welcome Justin Torres. So we have a treat. We're going to have each of these panelists are going to read a little bit for you of something. And Jonathan is up first.
Thanks, everyone, for turning up. And you guys, this is nice. So this is meant to be a brief reading so we can have a full conversation. And so I've got this galley that I'm very excited about. It's a book coming out in September that's my new and selected stories. So I looked for one that was just short enough and that I could read the whole thing. It's called Elevator Pitches. It's really a little bit of a stand-up routine. But I thought also it's good for people who are visiting Los Angeles to imagine some desperate, sweaty writer trying to impress a producer with these abysmal elevator pitches. So the only thing that's hard about reading this piece is it's got lots of white space on the page. There are lots of total breaks, and it just starts over. So I'll just do this so you'll know when I'm having a break. Okay, elevator pitches. It's a meet cute. They get into the same self-driving car at exactly the same time. They've noticed each other before. Like, you've got mail, but with no mail. Just raw, instinctive loathing. They're stuck there. This kind of car has no windows. The inside is nearly featureless. Nothing but a panel with buttons so you can request your destination. Then there's nothing more to do but wait and either acknowledge the person beside you or not. Horror movie. It's called The Emperor's New Flesh. Half the people in the world get flesh-eating bacteria, but it isn't considered polite to mention it. College roommates at Harvard, one from LA, the other from New York City. One, the son of a famous artist, grew up in an atmosphere of underground celebrity. The other is from money. His father's a rich financier. Things don't go well. By the third week of the semester, the hipster kid has created a barrier of broken shards of glass on the carpet across the two sides of the room. You can take it from there. This is a dystopia, but also a post-apocalypse. The dystopia survived the apocalypse. Nobody can get their head around this. Too bad. You can do post-apocalyptic things, survivalist stuff, rationing, killing, new tribalism, but you can also go the dystopia route, struggle against the decadent lords and masters, smash the seductive machine that's controlling your head. Just because you're crazy doesn't mean you're not also stupid. And neither precludes the possibility that you've got your boot on the neck of someone even worse off. An abject post-war apartment building. The windows are aluminum frame, the brickwork alternating yellow and ash gray, the air conditioners built in beneath the windows, as standardized as a Nazi or Soviet apartment block, really. None of the details are attractive. Nobody likes the building, but it's New York City. Hey, you're lucky to find an apartment at all. A game show. It's called You're Eating a Steak. Vegetarians answer questions about cuts of meat. At the end, the contestant with the worst score eats a steak. A bunch of people who work in the same building find one another mildly amusing, but not deeply interesting. This is a couple, two genius rock musicians who can communicate effectively only through guitar solos. Nothing else, texts, emails, actual conversation, all the rest falls flat. Sexually, she's indifferent to him. We'd call it shred. A workplace comedy meets a reality show, meets a game show. We follow a number of different people on their way to their real-life workplaces. Scrupulous attention to their morning routines, the bitter struggles no one speaks of. Get the kids off to school, the dog walked, survive the commute, the subway ever less congenial, the abject gobbled bagel. These early sequences have the grit of a Frederick Wiseman documentary. But when they arrive, they find their offices colonized by a roving game show called You Fired Me. A garish plastic set has been hurriedly constructed in the middle of the common area, the coffee machine or copier room, whatever. Obnoxious 70s style crass game show host, big hair, big style, doesn't really have your best interests in mind. He sticks a microphone in their faces, asks their names. The workers we've been following then compete in a game show, answering questions about the relevance of their daily activities to the bottom line. The winner fires the loser. Okay, I'm gonna get you with this one. You have to picture the desperate writer trying to get a show. Slower than ever, grinding of gears, weird whining sounds. One of these days they'll fix it, sure. Or it'll plummet. Pray you're not aboard that day. You could be like the frog in the pan of water slowly coming to a boil, never complaining, never noticing how bad it's got. Or make that two frogs, each pretending they're alone. It's called objection. Lawyers from an enlightened future arrive in time machines to sue us for being assholes. The judge is played by Sandra Bernhard. An elevator appears where there never was an elevator before. The doors never open. Some people start a religion based on what might be inside the elevator. Others just take the stairs. The old clown car routine, we've seen it a million times, but get this, we do it from the perspective of the clowns this time, from inside the car. It's swollen with clowns, this ragged-ass, sweaty gaggle of clowns. They've all been working together for years, nothing funny about it at all. Just get out and make the people happy already. Only here's the twist, the door won't open. You and me, stuck in here, going down. Thank you.
Up next, we have Jonathan Escoffery reading for you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for spending the afternoon or the hour with us. I'm going to read from just the beginning briefly of If I Survive You. And it's from a story titled Influx. It begins with, "What are you?" hollered from the perimeter of your front yard when you're 9, younger possibly. You'll be asked again throughout junior high and high school, then out in the world, in strip clubs, in food courts, over the phone, and at various menial jobs. The askers are expectant. They demand immediate gratification. Their question lifts you slightly off your pre-adolescent toes, tilting you, not just because you don't understand it, but because even if you did understand this question, you wouldn't yet have an answer. Perhaps it starts with, what language is your mother speaking? This might be the genesis, not because it comes first, but because at least on this occasion, you have some context for the question when it arrives. You immediately resent this question. Why does your mother talk so funny? Your neighbor insists. Your mother calls to you from the front porch, has called from this perch overlooking the sloping yard since you were allowed to join the neighborhood kids in play. Always the signals that playtime is over. Only now, shame has latched itself to the ritual. Perhaps you'd hoped no one would ever notice. Perhaps you'd never noticed it yourself. Perhaps you ask in shallow protest, what do you mean, what language? Maybe you only think it. Ultimately, you mutter, English, she's speaking English, before going inside, head tucked in embarrassment. In this moment, for the first time, you are ashamed of your mother, and you are ashamed of yourself for not defending her. More so than to be cowardly and disloyal, though, it's shameful to be foreign. If you've learned anything during your short residence on Earth, you've learned this. It's America, and it's the 80s. And in school, in class, you pledge to one and one flag only, the Stars and Stripes. Greatest country on earth is the morning anthem. It's the lesson plan, a mantra drilled into you day in, day out, a fact as inarguable as 2 + 2 = 4. And what you start to hear, as you repeat this to yourself, is the implication that all other nations, the other nations are seldom mentioned in school, are inferior. You believe this. It's an easy lesson to internalize, except that your brother Delano, your parents, nearly all your living relatives are Jamaican. When your play cousin moves from Kingston to Miami to your Cutler Ridge neighborhood, winding up in your 3rd grade class, refusing to pledge allegiance to your flag, you know to distance yourself from her. You say a quiet thanks that your last names are different. If you'd had any context for the question of what you are when it first came, you might have answered American. You were born in the US and you've got the paperwork to prove it. You feel pride in this fact, this inalienable status. You belt Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA on the 4th of July, and even more emphatically after visiting your parents' island nation for 2 weeks in your 9th summer. You disagree with every aspect of the island life down to the general lack of central air conditioning. You prefer burgers and hot dogs to jerked or curried anything. Back at home, your parents accuse you of speaking and even acting like a real Yankee. But if by Yankee they mean American, you embrace it. I speak English, you respond. Your parents' patois and what many deem an indecipherable accent still play as normal, almost unnoticeable against your ears, except that it is increasingly paired with the punitive. For instance, when your mother says, "Una can't spill the thing on the tile, but una can't clean it," and your brother says, "No me, mommy," and you say, "I didn't do it, Mom," She'll say, then who did? Must be a duppy. The duppy becomes the scapegoat for all the inexplicable activity that takes place in and outside your house. The duppy broke your mother's vase, then tried to glue it back together. The duppy hid your brother's report card underneath his mattress. The duppy possessed your father, dragged his body out for drinks after work, and didn't bring him home until morning. A duppy or ghost or even a grown man can be difficult to discipline, so you and your brother alone share the punishments. In school, when your world geography project is announced and you're made to choose from a list of countries to present on, you choose Mongolia. It's not till another student chooses Jamaica that you consider the tiny island a worthy option. Part of the project requires preparing a dish native to the country you've chosen. This is 4th grade. Your mothers do the cooking. When they meet one another on presentation day, eyes ring dark from having wrestled with foreign recipes late into the night, they nod imperceptibly, too exhausted for pleasantries. As your classmate begins her presentation on Jamaica, your mother sucks her teeth, a sound akin to industrial strength Velcro ripping apart. Drawing glances from several of the other parents. We could have brought in leftovers, she whispers, leaning in. If only you chose home. Thank you.
Up next, we have Justin Torres.
Hi, guys. So Blackouts is like a very strange novel and difficult to describe, and it has lots of pictures and images in it. I'm not going to try to describe too much, but what you need to know is just that there are 2 men in the desert, and one of them is dying. He's much older than the younger man, and they just have a long conversation throughout the book. And I'm going to read just a little bit of dialogue, and then I'm going to jump into a kind of recollection that the narrator has. So the older man is called Juan, and he says, "How about you tell me one thing about your mother? Now? For context. But we keep going backward. Please, just one thing. Make it terrible." My mother was a screamer, nervous, terrified, prone to panic. Though when I picture her screaming, what I see and hear in my mind is a vision from a time well before I was born. She first told me the story when I was a kid, very young, a vivid scene that stayed with me always. She would often tell me things. She'd pull herself away to a shoebox in the back of the closet filled with photos from the 50s and 60s and 70s. My mother exerted an immense gravitational force when she retreated to the floor of the closet, cradling the shoebox. I don't think she ever beckoned me. She didn't have to. I just knew to come and sit and wait for a story. All the stories amazed me. I'd never really been outside the neighborhood, whereas she seemed to have roamed the earth when just a girl, 15, pregnant. I wouldn't have been surprised if she told me she birthed my brother all alone in a prairie barn, propped up against a bale of hay among the soft neighing of horses, or in a manger, I suppose. This was that reverential age when no woman compared in beauty or mystery, not even the Virgin. And then there are these little blackout erasure poems in it. I'm going to read one of those. Narcissistic Cases, Rose S. General impression. Any description of Rose would be a rose. Prolong her vowels, hesitate, draw a statue, white translucent skin, make her a Rubens, paint her dreamy blue eyes, shrewd and penetrating, and lo, Rose is still a rose, a tangible return. And then I'm going to skip just a little bit to read a recollection of the father, because it seems fair. This is the last little bit I'll read. And then when I was 8 or 9 or so, my father left for 6 months to boot camp to become a state trooper. His prolonged absence, the career itself, came out of nowhere. We boys were never privy to the deliberations of the adult world. Later, I would learn he'd been recruited into the force to work narcotics because he spoke Spanish, because he spoke English with a Brooklyn accent, because of the color of his skin and the kink of his hair, because he knew how to act. Already so strong, he returned home transformed, not only muscled in new ways, but outfitted with high black boots that came up over the calf and a felt Stetson hat with a purple ribbon, armed. Suddenly, there were cops in our house all the time, drinking, cursing, shouting, their feet up on the coffee table. My father's new social world. None had arrived to save me, to call me little boy, to ask what was I doing here. Pigs, my mother hissed. It was the first time I heard the slur. I thought she'd made it up. Later still, much later, I would overhear my father on the phone speaking with regret about the arrest of a young mother, a dealer's girlfriend, whom he'd befriended over a year-long sting, a woman pressured into the trade herself, then swept up in the eventual bust. I heard him detail what might happen next with the children and the pain in his voice. Then he switched to Spanish, and I knew he was speaking to his partner, Hector, a gregarious man who, when he came by for dinner, would often wink at me after a lewd joke or a teasing jab about my father's good looks, as if we were complicit in the important work of keeping my father grounded. I loved Hector for that. Though late at night, after many beers, the joking would sometimes cease, and they would speak about work, always in Spanish, excluding me, but allowing me to notice other things, how deeply each searched the eyes of the other, how if one raised an eyebrow, the other might flick a dismissive hand. I noticed the passion with which one insisted on a point, and the deadly seriousness with which the other listened. I'd been told that the work they did was very dangerous, and I worried my father might be discovered and stabbed or shot. But watching them drink together, I came to feel the danger may be more insidious, or that had already arrived. I felt, in an unformed, childish way, outside of any political framework, not just that they might be hurt, but that they were being hurt by what they called the job. Thanks.
All right, well, I'm excited to get into a discussion. As I was preparing, I kept, what I really want to ask is what is fiction, but we won't start there. We'll start much smaller. I was just wondering if each of you could talk about the genesis of the work that you read. How did this project come to be? We can kind of go down the row or whatever works best.
Sure, I'll go first. So the story is so small. It was a moment's impulse, really, that made it come together. But what I'll talk about is the collection, which is so meaningful to me. I mean, it's short stories that date back to before I was a published writer, and then others up to the present. So it's for me, over. What is it? Oh, it's over 35 years of writing. And so in a way, it's as much like a kind of secret memoir as a book could be, because editing it and putting together these pieces and sequencing them and figuring out which ones stood up enough to collect or select, right? It's a new and selected. And then, of course, the exquisite pain of excluding things that in your memory, you thought they were good. You'd gone decades believing they were fine, they were great, and they're not so good, actually. They were only okay, and good enough to squeak into print at the time, but not to select for a book like this. But it was a very intimate process for me, because I was seeing myself become one writer and then the next, and gaining tools and struggling with new ideas. And also sometimes, for me, short stories are a place where I rehearse feelings that I am too tentative to place into novels yet. So there are very early glimmerings of things that I would wait 15 or 20 years to really confront and explore more completely in some of my novels. So it's a very, I've used this word once already, a very intimate book for me. I'm also just extraordinarily proud that I stuck with the short story, because a lot of people I think understandably when they write short stories early on because they seem approachable and often you're encouraged to do it. It's a way to learn to write fiction. But then once you start publishing novels, a lot of people tiptoe away from that practice. And I really wanted to be both. And so I kept at it, even when I was getting, truthfully, much more attention for the novels. So it's a record of a kind of special commitment for me.
We're glad that you stuck with it. Jonathan, what about you? Is your collection kind of a secret memoir as well? Can you talk about how the idea for this collection came to be?
For people who can actually see well enough to the stage, we did this thing because it's really interesting the way you're talking about, Jonathan, the way you're talking about the short story and the way, the kind of trajectory in the fiction writer's life, oftentimes away from it. I was someone who, this is a linked story collection, and when we meaning myself and my agent went on submission to sell the book, several editors were saying, we see this as a novel, and why, for marketability purposes, why not just call it a novel? And that was, it was a difficult decision. I have my still in my head, it's kind of a novel in stories, but there's a lot of use of the kind of blank space between stories. You meet a character in childhood, such as the section I was reading from, and then you follow him through college and what happens after college. And there's, you're learning what happens, since you last saw him, which I think in a linked story collection can add a bit of interest. Like, well, how did he wind up here? And now this story can fill us in on some of that. But I was holding up the cover just to say that what FSG and I decided was that because it's kind of this in-between forms, we didn't put the subtitle, so we didn't say "If I Survive You" stories. We didn't say "If I Survive You" a novel. And what happens is that, so I was just in Florida doing an event, and someone was very disappointed to learn that this wasn't my memoir, which is like, and my character goes on to do a lot of wild things. He's picking up these odd jobs and is testing his kind of personal ethics. And I was like, you're really excited to talk about the stuff that you thought I did that were really kind of weird and awkward and criminal in some cases. But I did, in terms of the idea coming to me, I started writing the book around the time I was applying for grad school MFA programs. And to that point, I had been writing very much outside of my experience, kind of reflecting what I'd been reading. And then I kind of accidentally wrote a story that featured a lot of these characters, the family that's in the book, who was a family a lot like mine. Jamaicans who moved to Miami, who are living in Miami, and kind of operating in that setting. And I realized I hadn't read, Jamaicans in Miami, essentially. To simplify it. And I realized, this is a kind of tapestry that I want to see in books, and I think is, it's always an exciting thing when you stumble upon. In a way we could look at it in the negative. It's a shame, why haven't we seen that book? But it's also for the writer a real opportunity to say, well, I'm the one who has the experience. I'm a subject matter expert, and now I'm going to do the research to really prove that, and put it in a book, put it on shelves, which is the hope until it's the reality. And I'm glad I kind of took that approach. But yeah, I really wanted to delve into, making sure that I was putting into the record these people who are around me, or people like them who I love and I think are worthy of having their stories told.
I love that. Thank you. Justin, what about you?
The question was about the genesis of the book, is that right?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Where did the
blanked out.
idea for this project come from?
Yeah. I think that there's so many ways to answer it. It took me 12 years to write the book, and so I was working on a manuscript that was kind of similar to my first book, We the Animals. It was about a young guy in his 20s doing sex work to get by, and I had also found this book that was a study of homosexuality in the 1930s, and I was obsessed with it. It was this scientific study that was full of this kind of eugenicist thinking, this kind of pseudo-Freudian thinking. It was troubling, but also incredibly personal and, I don't know, like titillating at the same time. It just fascinated me. I knew I wanted to write about it. I didn't know how. And so I lost that first manuscript, the one about the young boy in his 20s that was very similar to We the Animals. I left it in the back of the seat of a train. And
You actually
yeah,
physically
like
lost
it was like on a laptop, and I put the laptop in this. But you know what? I didn't like it. And I think that I just have like a very powerful unconscious. So I think I just it was so similar to what I had done before. And I wanted to do something different. And I think I just solved the problem. You know? But there were little bits that I had emailed myself. So I had these kind of vestigial bits of that novel in this book. And then I had this other project, and I was like, how can I take these little scraps I have and like this wandering I was doing, trying to write about this other book and make them come together. And it was actually really productive for me to like force those two things together.
Wow. I think there's like a Hemingway story too about like a manuscript left on a train or something. Has that come up before?
Oh yeah. Me and Hemingway, so much in common.
I mean, so I want to go back to this idea of a tapestry that Jonathan brought up. And also when I was thinking about how we would talk about your work, all three of you, it's so different, which I think makes for a great panel, makes for great reading. As I went back to Brooklyn Crime Novel and to the two works that you have just read, I was really interested in the shape of each of those books. And I want to use the word play. I think that play connotes something that's like low level or, childish, which is not the case. But I mean play in the sense of like stretching the shape of a text, So I think I'll start with Jonathan, just that collection, that novel and stories. I think it's so unique for how it's put together and for how it reveals information and how we see these characters at different eras and plays with time against chronological time. Can you just talk about how you put that together? And then I'd be interested in hearing from both of you about those other works as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you use the word play. I mean, so I have my second book it's under contract, but it's not quite done. And I hated it until I started playing again on the page and started actually doing things that actually interest me. When I set out to write this book, I kept calling it a novel in my head, and I kept calling it stories. And I bring that up to say I was putting it together and I was breaking it apart, and I wanted to have a sense of kind of like We the Animals in a way, where it's like the chapters can stand alone so much, and I wanted that sense, and also have that sense of building towards that larger narrative, especially around a family. And so like the story I was reading from earlier, we meet Trelawney when he's about 9 years old, and that same story takes us to when he's finishing college. And I wanted to have ultimately he's not getting along with his father in particular, who his father sees him as kind of like overly Americanized. But even when Trelawney eventually tries to understand his Jamaican roots, his father's not very into that idea as well. But the way they actually think about the world and see the world represented through this long time second person narration is actually quite similar. And the father both judges his son for being an artist in a sense, but he himself wanted to be an artist when he was younger and kind of had that desire stamped out of him by his own father. So I wanted to show, it felt like an opportunity to show how these characters, can actually relate in lots of ways, but don't actually communicate that to one another. But the reader is able to be let in on that possibility. And then also, playing with time in the way that we're following Trelawney, who's kind of my main character, the American-born son in this family, as he's about to come back from college. And then we jump back in time and see his father when he's a young man and follow him all the way past the Trelawney story, where we're actually understanding, well, what happens when Trelawney comes back from college. And so there's a lot of playing with time and moving in a way that I think feels like when we're thinking about our own lives, like we can condense that and think about what happened in over the course of an hour, or we might take this longer view and think about, what over the last several decades has led me to this point. And I feel like story, I shouldn't say that's just stories, but I wanted to show, I wanted to play in those different spaces so that, I think the third story after these two that I was just discussing, like, does take place over the course of an hour, and seeing like what meaning can I find when Trelawney, shows up for a weird job that he found on Craigslist, and he's asked to do something that's, strange, I guess. Yeah, and just playing with, it's my first book, so in a way I wanted to, it's like if I read a great second person, I don't know, Laurie Moore story or something like that, and having it, oftentimes you'll have instructors who say, well, avoid second person, like the masters have already kind of, done that. And so I'm thinking, well, but can I do that? And shouldn't I try? And I felt like my book was a great place to try different things that I really admired and was able to fall in love with, both as the reader and ultimately the writer of that kind of story.
Great. The other, Justin, you want to talk about how your
Sure.
project took shape?
I'll just mix up the order. Yeah. I think that, I like that you asked about play. I think that it made me think of something that I hadn't thought of before, which is that I was so frustrated. I felt really serious, this project that I was writing, and I was taking it too seriously, and I wasn't enjoying myself. And I think that the character of Juan came about because I was thinking about how to kind of tease myself out of the seriousness, And I've had these kind of queer elders in my life who at various moments when I've taken myself way too seriously, was just way too sad and way too self-obsessed with my own problems, were just like, other people have thought about this stuff, right? Like read something, get out of yourself, like go look at other people's reactions to the world and get more interested in the world and less interested in you and your own problems. And I think that there's a kind of teasing, playful quality to the character of Juan in the book, and I think I needed that to continue writing, and to kind of find a new way to engage with the kind of heavy material that I was writing about. I don't know if anybody has called Blackout's a playful book, but they should.
It's not quite the right word.
Yeah.
In terms of creativity.
Yeah.
As I think of creativity, creating something, making art,
Totally.
changing shapes of things.
Yeah, and I was I had a lot of fun blacking out, like physically blacking out all of I photocopied the original book that I was writing in response to this kind of sex study, and I started blacking out all the stuff I hated, and that was really fun, but it wasn't very poetic. Then I was like, oh, there's this whole tradition of erasure poetry. Let me try and do it with intention. And that was play. That was definitely cutting things, ripping things, marker everywhere.
Authorial power,
Yeah.
in terms of editing and changing the shape of someone else's words as well.
Yeah. It was destructive play. That was
I like it.
powerful.
I like it. Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, so Brooklyn. Do you hear me? There we go. Brooklyn crime novel. Yeah, it was a very challenging and unusual structural project for me, and it partly emerged. So it's a return for me. Well, my answers are like the old guy answers. It's a return for me to what is kind of, for better or worse, my legacy material, right? The gentrification of Brooklyn in the 70s and 80s. And I'd left that material alone for a long while, and then psychic experience and outward changes in the world kind of drew me back to it. And I was like, oh, wait, I'm going to go at this again. But the project arose because I was, in a way, suspicious of my own certainties and also of the power of narrative to make things into one big story. My earlier approaches to this legacy material were very much like the coming of age story. A kid, in Brooklyn, So I was drawing on Dickens, and I was drawing on Betty Smith, and I was drawing on, other archetypal kid in the city kind of things. Call It Sleep by Henry Roth, which was a great form, and I could pour a lot of my own material into it. But it also has this sort of unity that I was like, now I need to destroy that. So the form of playfulness, and I really relate a lot to this idea. It was a scissors and glue pot destructive creativity where I was like, remix, chop it up, turn it around. And, the book ended up seeming to me, the urgent thing for me was to have it be a collective, almost like a fictional oral history of the neighborhood. So everyone had to contradict each other, and every story had to fly out of some detail in another story, but off to a strange angle. And the reader had to do a lot of the work of sewing this together in their experience of the stories. So the playfulness was the playfulness of attacking my own usual methodology, but it was another kind of playfulness too. It was the playfulness of voice, because what makes a book hang together if you've destroyed narrative certainties and causality, and you jump from character to character? Well, it's that the voice is a kind of like grabby, irresistible, maybe sometimes exasperating. I thought of this book as like you sit down in a bar next to someone and you don't think you're going to be talking to them all night, and they start, this one's failing, and you start listening and they're free associating and you keep thinking, okay, and then it turns into another story and suddenly 7 hours have gone by and you've listened to this compilation and you're like, I don't know what that was, but I feel like I lived in this neighborhood. I feel like I grew up here. So there was also the playfulness of just making the voice somehow do the work that character and narrative weren't going to do in the ordinary sense in this book, of just sweeping you up and not letting you go. I hope.
Yesterday, I had another fiction panel, and Rita Bullwinkle, we were talking about what makes fiction work, and she's brilliant. She said this thing that I love. She said, I wrote it down. Of course, I'm not going to get it exactly, but she said, I'll keep reading anything if it feels like I'm being confessed to. That it reminds me so much of what you're saying, that and I think there's elements. Does that speak to you guys? Are there elements of that in your work that you felt like your characters were confessing on the page?
I don't know where this phrase comes from originally. I ran into it in Kurt Vonnegut it's in Breakfast of Champions. There's a book called Now It Can Be Told. And I always think that my books, the energy in them secretly is like, now it can be told.
Yeah, I think the confessional kind of gets sneered at quite a lot, like, the confessional mode, and I dig it. I think I feel the same way. I like it when I feel like something is being, there's a kind of a testimony, a confession, something is being revealed, something is being kind of brought up from the depths. I think I write in that mode quite a lot, and I will own it.
Yeah, short answer. I think yes. Yeah. I think there's a lot of play too in like how you're like a lot of the I think you can draw a lot of power from anticipation. Like, what is the reader? What are you as the writer thinking that the reader is anticipating, and how do you subvert that anticipation? And I find like those are the moments where I feel like in my writing the most powerful confessions come through, where it's like, okay, we're having this conversation about this thing that we, these truths that we think we both could agree on, and then slipping in, but here's how I actually see it. Here's something that maybe you haven't considered, or I've never told anybody. I meaning the character. Though sometimes I meaning the author. I think of one of my favorite stories is A Temporary Matter by Jhumpa Lahiri. and there's a couple who's has a marriage that's struggling, and there's a blackout at the house, and they decide to play this game where they exchange secrets over the course of a week. Each night, a pair of secrets will be revealed. And it's such a great tool for grabbing the reader, because it's like you as the reader are promised a pair of secrets that you know could either bring this couple closer together or really explode things. And I think that's such a powerful tool.
I know that at AWP, we always have a lot of students and aspiring writers of fiction. Are there things for you that kick you out of a narrative, that make fiction not work, that you're like, I really hate when someone's doing X? Or are there things in your own writing that you feel like you kind of write yourself into sometimes that end up being a frustration with how a story is not working?
I really hate when a first-person narrator tells you how great they are. and I mean it like unironically, like they're actually, so you see that in a lot of like undergrad student papers kind of thing, but not just them, and I definitely don't mean to come for that particular demographic, but the like, I was the most popular kid in high school, and I was star of the football team, and this is how and then it usually starts with I woke up and I remembered how great I am. That to me, that's one of my pet peeves, I guess, that I see a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. I think in my own work, I do find myself being dishonest. Like I find myself often writing something, and it sounds pretty, and it's it's like it's reaching for some kind of sublimity that it's just like, I don't actually think or feel that, or I don't, like the character doesn't think or feel that in this moment, and like it would be nice, but like, and I think that I try and catch that as much as possible. I read aloud a lot, and I always tell my students to read aloud, that like the ear catches not just like rhymes that you might not want, or things that, repetitions of words. Like the ear capture also, I think, captures that kind of dishonesty. I think if you read your own work aloud and you're kind of like, like there's just a moment where you're just like, like just a little bit of cringe, then it's like, oh, go and like make it so that you can kind of read it with authority and confidence, and like in a way that you're like, yeah, I mean that. I mean what I said.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much the case that you have to invent the terms for each story. And the search is to be as confused and as overwhelmed or as in the dark as you were the very first time you ever sat down to write. So as your kind of toolkit stacks up, or you begin to notice some of your chops, or, it's like making sure you don't just play the same guitar solo over again. Like, oh, I here's what I sound like. Self karaoke is the danger, right? So, but that's such an exciting pursuit too, is always trying to thrust yourself into a situation where your tools are useless, where you're inventing or imagining something that is outside your comfort zone and outside your area of understanding. You're not even sure why you've assigned it to yourself, and that's when the action is going to be good again.
I find too, for my personal failings, thinking about the way I approached relationships in my writing in general, thinking about the various ways that a romantic relationship can fall apart, or a parent-child dynamic can be really fraught. I love exploring that, but I also realized after writing this book, that was eking out into like my other writing, and I thought, I don't want to be cynical about the world in that particular kind of way, and I don't want to. I know for myself, I was ingesting just a lot of story via books and other media on Netflix. Everyone's marriage was falling apart, and every single, there was always an affair, and either the husband or someone was always absolutely terrible. And I think that while we're reflecting reality in some ways, we can also imagine better ways to be. And so, that's kind of like my more current reminder, like, not every relationship has to be bad. We can imagine like a really great one. And I hope to believe that there actually are really great ones out in the world.
I think this is a thing, Jonathan. The completely terrible person in fiction is it nullifies the vision of social reality. Even though we have a world where there are completely terrible people, they're not really actually interesting characters. And if I think about what I sometimes contend with aspiring apprentice writers in conversation with them about their manuscripts, I've noticed them sort of surrounding some character with proof that they're absolutely degraded, that shooting fish in a barrel, I guess, is the cliche for that. It doesn't really enliven storytelling to have the villain be utterly bad, not to kind of also care about them or like them or have them surprise you or be alive.
Yeah. But even when they're like really nuanced, and it's like, oh, these are two great people, but human nature dictates that they just will never work. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're both doing their best, and yet we just can't get along as human beings kind of narrative. Maybe there's some truth, like it can't always be good all the time, and then the conflict that is so helpful in our fiction. Like sometimes I wonder about, I love conflict. I'm interested in the conflict. That's where, it's like even in the algorithms, it's like if you're on YouTube, the algorithm is pushing you towards conflict. And I just wonder if, I don't know, like if we've got 9 couples in a book, then at least the 10th can be, working it out in a healthy way. Maybe they've been to, I don't know, therapy or something.
I also, in addition to being a critic, I also teach high school. And my high school's English students will say, why does every story we read have to be depressing? And I'm like, because the story where everyone was happy, nothing happened, the end, is like not an interesting story. But I love that about, considering that as well, that not everything, I just love it. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think I was somewhere wintry, maybe Massachusetts or Minnesota or someplace where it was extremely cold, and all the stories we were reading were, they were kind of sad. And a student said, well, can we read a happy story? And I was like, I don't know those stories, And another student was like, no, that's not the point. And I get that too. But then I finally found one, and there's an author in LA named Dana Johnson who wrote a story called 3 Queens Sipping Tea or something like that in her first collection. And it's a really happy story where there's like next to no conflict. And I just wanted to let people know that there is at least one story in the world that's kind of happy, and you kind of like just enjoy spending time with these 3 friends.
One of the things that I like so much about all of your writing is that this idea that Justin brought up a while ago about like immersing yourself in the world, like getting yourself out there, thinking about so many things. I'm curious to know, what kinds of things were you all immersing yourself in as you were working on these projects? Were there, Jonathan, I think of your work so much that a lot of your fandoms make their way into your work and into the language that you use specifically. But I was kind of curious from all of you about what were you researching or just consuming as far as media, entertainment, even as you were working on these projects?
Oh, I can jump in. Yeah, I mean, I do often feel this incredibly, for me, really lucid, open, obvious connection between things I'm reading or responding to and surrounding myself with, and they feed my work so directly, and I just never think it needs to be disguised or obscured for for appearances, nor do I feel like I have to defend myself against influence, because it always comes out as what I turned out to want to say anyway. It always ends up being mine if I love it and incorporate it into my work, especially if there are a range of multiple things and they would seem incoherent. They wouldn't seem like they would all go together. When I was writing Brooklyn Crime Novel, I came across this incredible 5-part movie called Untitled Pizza Movie. And I mean, this was in deep quarantine, with deep lockdown time, and before the vaccine. So all the media that came to you at that time, any book you read, it felt like you were on an island with it. And this film, which was a kind of confessional, essayistic documentary about growing up in New York, but also just about pizza, and loving it and pursuing it, was so eccentrically, it was so unpredictable. It really it encouraged me in the formal freedom that I was daring myself to employ in the book, but also just the intimate texture. It was company at a time when there was no company, and I, it just made me think about how books are kind of like human objects. They're people. And when you really meet them, you're really mingling with people. It's a form of ESP or mind melding. So anyway, that's my example that comes to mind.
Lovely.
Yeah, I was reading everything. I mean, I was doing a ton of research for Blackouts. I was going into archives. There was this guy named Thomas Painter, who his archive is located at the Kinsey Institute, and he was like this rich guy who came out in the 20s and was kind of disinherited, but he was like really interested in homosexuality and his own homosexuality and researching it, and he would take notes on every hustler that he had sex with. And the 1950s were his like Puerto Rican years, he called them, and it was just like, it was fascinating. And there are all these pictures. He would take pictures right back on, like, really sexy pictures. It was a complicated archive. It was a troubling archive in many ways, but fascinating. And then there was so many other. There was this kind of, one of the main characters in this book is this real life figure named Jan Gay. And researching everything about her life, she was this amazing lesbian activist, and she knew Magnus Hirschfeld and traveled to Berlin, and she later in life lived with Andy Warhol for a second. And I was going to all of these places, and it was delightful. And a lot of it makes it into the book. Like, there are a lot of pictures from these various archives that I was looking at, and then I was just reading things for inspiration as well, and like that's all in there as well. There's all these footnotes, and Juan, the character Juan, he's read everything, and so he's just constantly alluding to other books, and that was really, I mean, like, talking about influence and just being really upfront about like, these are the books and moments in history that my book is in conversation with, and like here, and there's all these footnotes, and I hope that people look them up. Yeah.
I guess two things I could mention. I was really interested in language, how I would present language, like what would be, the book is set primarily in Miami. A little bit is in Jamaica as well, and also in the Midwest. And just trying to capture, like figure out how to present, for instance, like a Jamaican dialect, Jamaican patois on the page. So the second story in the book is told from the father in this family's perspective, and it's entirely in this Jamaican patois, and kind of figuring out what the rules are going to be for the language and presenting that, and going to Jamaica and seeing, how do I participate in the legitimization of patois, because this is not what's taught in schools in Jamaica, right? You're just teaching English. And understanding that it's not always the same decision or conclusion that's been come to, or reading Jamaican authors like Marlon James, who is a total master at this. And what he does in A Brief History of Seven Killings, for instance, his massive, like, almost 800-page book, is that one character's dialect is presented one way. Its words are spelled one way via one character, and a different character it's spelled a different way. And because there are, Jamaicans will decide to spell things differently. And kind of, researching what's been done, but what's also, what are the people saying? Going online and seeing, I think there's like a Jamaicans.com kind of thing where, what's the consensus on a thing? And then, doing more rigorous research, like, reading the newspapers and seeing what was the political situation in Jamaica in the 1970s when this family would have left, what was going on with the clashing political parties, and what's been documented about the U.S. involvement in kind of funding one side. And also just like Miami-isms, I think, was something I was really interested in. So in Miami, a large part of the population, if you ask your friend what they spent their time doing that day, and they hadn't really been doing anything interesting, they'll say, "Oh, just eating shit. I was just eating shit." And it's such like it's like a fun, like, the first time I heard it, I was like, "You're eating shit?" And it just means like you weren't really doing much with your time. You're just, hanging out, I guess. And being able to, again, like, find that, like, there was a lot more that I collected and put on the page, and then it was, you make that decision that, oh, this is actually, like, I'm playing too much. Let's get back to the, the narrative. And just, thinking about the conversations I wanted to be having with other first-gen Americans who are kind of talking about that trajectory of family coming to the U.S. and the way a lot of us whose parents are from elsewhere and were born here, oftentimes we can, think a lot about where our parents are coming from, maybe even romanticize where our parents are coming from, or imagine what it would be like if our parents had never come here. And thinking about counter narratives for, various, like, stereotypes, and in particular, I'm thinking of, like, Jamaican stereotypes that I wanted to talk back to. And that was, it's fun, but it also feels like, hey, this is my time to feel empowered to write that one sentence that's gonna, be a blow against what I see as ignorance.
Thank you. I'm curious how each of your relationship to craft or to the genre of fiction has changed over the course of the time that you've been writing. Do you conceptualize of it differently, or what's that relationship been like?
Yeah, I mean, I get sent a lot of books, which is great. And also, it's like I get sent a lot of books that are coming out soon. And I think that a lot of them, there's a certain kind of linearity and progression that I was feeling kind of exhausted by, just like feeling like things were just like starting at the beginning and ending at the end, and moving like really well crafted books. Like you couldn't find a fault in them. But they were so smooth that I felt like I would get to the end and I hadn't been disturbed enough, or I hadn't been challenged enough, or something, And so I think that my relationship to my first book was incredibly, like, it's a very accessible, like it's a very quick book. I would meet people all the time and be like, I read it in an hour and a half, and I'd be like, I spent 6 years on that book. And so, like, this, I think the second time around, I was like, I'm gonna make something really challenging. Like, I'm gonna make something that invites you to kind of put it down and not just race to the end, but, like, it's the most put downable book of the year. But I wanted, like, I think that in my own work, that's where I'm headed. My thoughts about genre, my thoughts about fiction, my thoughts about what I'm doing, like, I don't know, I think, not difficulty for difficulty's sake, but I don't know, not quite so smooth and breezy and easy. Yeah.
That creates a kind of tension for the reader that creates interest and that challenge. I think asking a lot of the reader makes it a rich and enjoyable reading experience as well.
Yeah.
I loved your first book, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, no, people definitely like that one better. I mean, who wants to be challenged? But I think that a challenge can be an invitation as well, right? Like in
love
certain
that.
moments for certain people, I think that it's like, oh, huh. I actually, yeah, this is for me. I wanna find out more. I wanna put this down and kind of sit with it for a little while. And other people will just put it down and not pick it back up.
Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of it similarly in terms of, thinking of the question in terms of accessibility versus the challenge. And I mean, for me, I'm always looking for the sweet spot, but also understanding that me as a reader, like, we always get that question, like, who's your ideal reader, or maybe who you're writing for. And it's like, I want to write for really intelligent people, as I see it, like people who want to do a little bit of work and not like force feed the story to them, and not, leave a little bit of space for them to co-create as they're reading. And for me, like, if I have a reader who is able to fill in the blanks a little bit, and I'm leaving enough space for that to happen, that's what I'm interested in more now. And I think I'm probably thinking even more of the book I'm, finishing now than even, the one that's already out, because that's, to me, like, I don't know, a book that you can read over and over again. I think that's what I think a bit about. Which, although We the Animals, you can read over and over and over again.
I really just stepped this up
yeah.
so you guys would be forced to say nice things about We the Animals.
That's all I got on that.
So Mohsin Hamid, who wrote Exit West, I heard him talking, and he said this thing that struck me. He said, "I don't really write novels; I write half novels. The reader writes the other half." And it was so. I found it so arresting, because I thinking of it as a policy, as an intention, was really striking. But another part of me, of course, wanted to say to him, they're all half novels. The reader is always building it with you, and but his conscious theorizing of this reminds me of some of what we're talking about here. And I certainly think that my ideas about causality have changed. What kind of ligaments I want between scenes and ideas and situations, and whether I want them to be white space for the reader to work with, or not. But the other thing that's really changed for me over the years or deepened, is my fascination with the way time operates in fictional narrative space. The way a scene is kind of taffy. Someone can say something, and in a real objective omniscience, like if you were filming it, the next character's reply might come, 5 seconds later. But you can do interiority and have that next character's reply come 20 pages later. And because of flashbacks or flash forwards, in a kind of weird elasticity, it could also, a decade could get encompassed between that moment. And the way scenic time is susceptible to this taffy effect of interiority, that to me is like the most fascinating thing. I used to take it for granted. I think I did it out of muscle memory. I did what I'd read. I made scenes based on the notion about tempo and the proportion of interiority and external behavior that I'd read. But now, I guess anyone who has a moment where they read Nabokov and his way of engaging with narrative time forces you, it ruptures that contract. So you have to start thinking about it consciously. But I've never stopped.
Yeah, I think that the point about causality and time, like I think it's like what I'm always thinking about. I'm always writing in vignettes, and I started just getting really obsessed with reading books that were composed of a series of vignettes, and and all different kinds, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it was, and some kind of prose poetry or whatever, and what is the movement when you get rid of causal movement, right? You have this associative movement where kind of one line might lead you to the next line of the next vignette. It's
the Elizabeth Hardwick novel, Sleepless Nights.
I haven't read it.
Oh, you're gonna love that.
I can't wait.
You have to read that.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm gonna read it when I get home. I'm really into. I mean, like some of the books influence blackouts, like Pedro Páramo or Kiss of the Spider Woman. Like they're these written in these little moments, these snippets, these vignettes, and I don't know. There's something really wonderful about studying books that are composed in that way and learning how to do plot without things being plotted or avoid plot altogether and still have a sense of forward momentum. Yeah.
I love that, and the Mohsin Hamid, the thing that he said about readers is very similar to this quote that I spoke about last week. If anybody saw the National Book Critics Circle Awards, it's the reason that I became a critic. I saw this quote and I was like, oh my God, yes. There's a British critic, Frank Kermode, and he said that a novel is not complete until the reader animates the text. I found that to be very empowering as a new critic, as somebody who was like, what's my authority? And I love this idea of the fiction writer and the reader meeting together on the page and, it being something that's created in the moment of reading it. So it's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And also Exit West is just phenomenal. So we are running out of time, but I have time, I think, for maybe one more question, maybe two, but I did want to ask now the question that I raised kind of at the top of our discussion. What is fiction? Which is a big question, I know. But if you had to tell someone, is it just a shelf in a bookstore, an arbitrary decision that's made by publishers or marketing professionals? But as someone who has been recognized for your phenomenal fiction, all three of you, how would you explain the genre, or what are the boundaries around it for yourself? Big question.
I feel like I should start just because maybe it won't be the best answer. But one of my earliest fiction professors, John Dufresne, wrote a craft book called The Lie That Tells the Truth. And to me, it's just kind of in the title. It's like these things that haven't necessarily literally happened, although sometimes the things have literally happened. It's a search for meaning without the constraints of the literal truth having happened. And I think we can take, the elements, all of the craft elements that we can take from poetry or reportage or anything that you can imagine, any writing style, genre you can imagine, and trying to, build a lens for how to view the world, again, without that constraints of the literal having happened. And even if I went last, it wouldn't have been better for that, because yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I really don't. I mean, I feel very puzzled. What pops into my mind is that I respond most, I think, to fiction that doesn't feel like, oh, this is fiction, right? Like fiction that kind of blurs the line between poetry, right? Fiction that's blurring the line between factuality and nonfiction, history and whatever. Like fiction that's not. I think I don't want to know. I want to know less what fiction is, I think, is the answer. Yeah.
Okay, so we're on like a quoting binge. Samuel Delany has an epigraph to his great novel Dahlgren, and the line is, and I think it comes from like dinner party conversation. Someone just said it, and the line is, "You have confused the true and the real." And it's a puzzle. I've thought about it forever, and I don't even know that I've taken out of it what Delany intends, but I've always thought that, okay, what's the difference between the true and the real? Well, the true is like a category where there's an outside to it. There's the untrue. You have a a delineation, and on one side is the true and on the other is the untrue. But the real is a weirder category because the real also gobbles up the unreal, because the world of the real is experiential. And so things that can't be proven, things that can't be looked at or necessarily agreed upon are inside the real. Unreal things, ideology, passions, anticipations, torments, dreams. You know, maybe the waking life is a great example of this. Our daily lives include these unreal interludes which belong to us intimately, and those are our dreams. For me, fiction is somewhere in that like area of the real, where it gobbles up lots of unreal things because experience is made of this improvable, unprovable kind of recombination of real and unreal. And that's where fiction lives, in my mind.
I love that. Yeah. Stealing that.
Same. I want to thank each of you for all of your work, you know, for everything you've written. And I just want to share with you, as board members on the NBCC, we talk about living with these books for so long. We discuss them so passionately. And all three of you, your work has just led to such phenomenal discussions for us as critics. And I know that you have many fans here in the audience as well. Many of you maybe who haven't read the work of all three of our panelists, but I would just encourage you, the most important thing you can do is buy their books, is read them, is talk about them, put them in other people's hands. So I encourage you to do that if you don't have the works of all three of these writers. And I just want to thank you so much for your words today. I feel like it was so enriching.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us today.
Very quickly, if you want to buy books from these authors or other future authors, there is a stand, like a table with all future author books going left. And if you go further left, that's where the book signing will be. Please give our writers time to make their way there to the signing table. Thank you.